Hi there and welcome to SUP Safe Module 1, reviewing the basics and managing the risk. If everybody's ready, then we'll make a start. Contents for Module 1. Okay, let's just run through the contents. So first off, we'll remind ourselves of the basics. Please don't confuse basic skills and techniques with something that only concerns those new to paddleboarding. Basic skills and techniques are at the core of paddling and are just as relevant to intermediate and advanced paddlers. So this section covers many of the cornerstones of paddling and it's relevant to us all. Next up is hazard identification and managing the risk. We'll talk through how to manage the risk for our paddling venues. This will cover hazard identification and formulating what we think the overall risk of our paddling is. And we'll also cover mitigation factors for reducing the risk. We'll review good practice for launch and recovery. We've got 3 great videos covering launch and recovery practice for inland and coastal locations. We've got a few questions to test our understanding of this module. And there's also a reference and further reading section. This module takes about 30 minutes to complete, and that also includes watching the videos. This slide is about reminding ourselves of the basics. Is our board correctly inflated to the manufacturer's recommended pressure? This is normally about 15 psi. Having our board correctly inflated is going to make it stable and more efficient to paddle. And especially if we're going in the sea, then we really want a stable and stiff board and able to handle the waves much better. But hey, we've all been there the first time we pumped up our board, making comments like, the gauge must be stuck, the board feels rock hard. Always wear your leash. A leash is our lifeline back to a board, and if we fall in and lose the board, then that could put us in serious trouble, especially if the water's cold, leaving us a long swim back to the shore. Is our fin securely fitted to the fin box? We just need to check the clip or the bolt. Is your paddle securely put together? Most of us have 3-piece paddles, so we just need to make sure all the connections are good because we don't want to lose the bottom section in the river. Don't forget to kneel when launching or landing or in shallow water. This is going to prevent us from having an accident if we slip and fall off the board. Paddle with a buddy or in a group. It's much safer and much more fun. Carry a mobile phone so we can call for assistance if required, and always have it in a waterproof case. Let someone know where we're going and how long you'll be. And it's also good just to send them a quick text when you finish saying, it was really great on the water, but now I'm safely back on the bank. We need to look after our back. We're lifting the boards out of the boot of the car or off a roof rack. We're using the pump. Our technique might not be that great, so we're putting a lot of strain on our back, so we just need to take care. On rivers and canals, we navigate on the right, so it's a bit like driving your car on the right. On the sea, it's a little bit more complicated. Maritime law says the smaller, more maneuverable craft should give way to larger boats, respective of the right of way. So, hey, we're pretty small and maneuverable, so everybody else is going to expect us to give way, so just be careful. The other thing we need to do is we also need to be very vigilant, as craft may actually approach us from behind. I've always found carrying a whistle is actually great for letting other craft know that I'm there. Hazard identification and managing the risk. One of the main challenges we face as paddlers is understanding how much risk we are exposing ourselves to. How much risk you're prepared to accept is a personal decision that you need to answer, but just ensure if you're paddling in a group that you come to a consensus about the risk. All venues we paddle at carry a risk. It's just not practical to eliminate all the risk, as this would mean just staying at home. So assuming we're not staying at home, then we need to identify the hazards, understand the consequence of the hazard, and take a practical view of the likelihood that the hazard may occur. Once we've done this, we will know the risk. The next section looks at a template for reviewing the overall risk by identifying the individual hazards, consequences, and likelihoods. In the same way we drive our car or cross the road, we all carry out a mental risk assessment before we act. We're so used to this process when we're driving the car that we hardly notice we're doing it. We need to undertake a similar risk assessment process for paddling, where we identify each hazard, look at the consequences, weigh up the likelihood of it happening, and come up with a risk factor. By standing on the shore for 5 minutes prior to launching, we will be able to run through the risk assessment process and arrive at an overall decision: stop or go. If you're in a group, then do this exercise together, as many heads are better than one. Once we're on the water, this risk assessment process doesn't stop. We still need to be observing what is happening in order to make timely decisions based on good judgment. Just remember, good judgment only comes with experience, so start off carefully with low-risk venues like rivers or small lakes, and gradually build up to larger lakes and the sea. Again, going back to our analogy of the car, when we passed our test, we still had to learn a great deal about driving, and this only came with experience. Hazard identification and managing the risk. It helps if we try and think about risk in terms of high, medium, or low. We can also use the same terms for consequence, i.e., what is going to happen, and the likelihood, which is a probability of the hazard occurring. In this way, if we review the hazards and we're getting too many high risks, we may need to rethink our plan. Maybe another venue will be more suitable for today's weather. First off, if we just take a look at the hazards, so an example of some hazards would be an offshore wind, other craft operating in the same area, or maybe a strong current. If we move on to the consequences, well, the consequence of an offshore wind, we might get blown out to sea. The consequence of other craft in the area, we might be involved in a collision and get injured. And the consequence of a strong current, we may actually get swept downstream. So if we kind of think about those hazards and consequences in terms of kind of high, medium, and low, well, they're all pretty high. Okay, if we next look at the likelihood. So if we have an offshore wind and it's 20 miles an hour, then the kind of likelihood of us actually being swept out to shore is pretty high. Maybe if the wind speed dropped to 12, maybe that's kind of about a medium risk. But if we had an offshore wind and it was only 5 miles an hour, then the likelihood of us getting swept out to sea would be low. Okay, so if we just kind of wrap all that together, pull it together, and then kind of say, okay, let's just look at the risk. So we're saying the risk is equal to the consequence times the likelihood. So if we take our example, one of the examples, so the offshore wind example, so we're saying 12 miles an hour, the risk is a high consequence times a medium likelihood. So it's probably a high risk. If the offshore wind speed was only 5 miles an hour, then our risk would still be a high consequence. The consequence doesn't change, but the likelihood has changed now. It's a low likelihood. So that's probably a medium risk. If we take a look at mitigation factors, so these are factors that we can use to actually reduce the risk. So if we use our offshore wind example of 12 miles an hour, where we've said this is pretty high risk, and it's making us feel maybe a bit uncomfortable. So our mitigation would be to stay close to the shore, so we could kind of take the high risk and move it towards a medium risk. Managing the risk, canals and rivers. Okay, if we look at the potential hazards first, so we've got our table, so we've got man-made hazards and we've got natural hazards. And then if we paint in our lovely stretch of canal or river, and we've got a few paddlers. So first of all, if we look at the wind has a big influence on us as paddlers. So beginners, we might start to struggle at 8 miles an hour, and intermediate paddlers may start to feel uncomfortable in 12 miles an hour. Obviously, if we have a tailwind, then this is not an issue, but if we're doing a there and back trip and we have to turn around and paddle against the wind, then things could become difficult. In these circumstances, we could kneel down, as this will reduce the force of the wind on us, and paddling while kneeling is quite powerful, so we will still keep a good speed. Shortening your paddle while kneeling to make a canoe-style paddle can also help. Alternatively, we could plan to paddle into the wind on the outward leg, meaning on the return leg we would have a helping hand with the wind, which may be welcome if we're starting to feel tired. We could also use a similar approach for the river current by paddling upstream on the outward leg and have a helping hand on the return by paddling with the flow. Okay, we're just going to run through each one of the hazards. So we could have other craft on the water. There could be moored boats, mooring ropes or buoys. We could have bridges, locks, piers, jetties or tunnels, or maybe we could have some weirs. We could have a sluice gate or a flood barrage, or maybe there's been a spillage and there could be some pollution on the water. Natural hazards, we may have a slippy bank, so it could be muddy or wet grass. There's the river current to think about, so we need to ask ourselves the question, can I paddle against the flow? And it's probably worth bearing in mind that we probably paddle somewhere between 2 to 4 miles an hour. Are there any rapids, rocks or sandbanks? Have we spotted any blue-green algae, which is toxic to humans and animals? Any giant hogweed, which has sap, which can actually burn us? And we'll talk a little bit more about blue-green algae and giant hogweed in Module 3. And are there any overhanging branches that we might get caught in? So while I'm paddling, I'm always looking ahead, and I'm looking ahead at any obstacles that may be in the way or any hazards, but I'm also occasionally turning behind and looking behind, because other craft may actually approach from behind. So when I've identified a hazard, I need to kind of put in a buffer zone. So this means I'm only going to approach so close, and then I'm going to maintain my distance. So this is going to help. Maybe I slip and fall in, and I don't want to slip and fall in and then get tangled up around some mooring ropes or a mooring buoy. Maybe I come across an obstacle, so I've got a weir or a lock. So in plenty of time, I'll probably check behind and then pull up to the shore. The reason why I check behind is the best landing spot may not be on the right hand side, it may actually be on the left hand side, and I have to cross over. So I'm just checking for traffic both ways. I'll look for a good place to get out, carry my board around. Again, probably go a fair distance downstream from the weir or the lock. Especially locks, I don't want to get in the way of any boats that may be waiting to go into the lock, or boats that have come through the lock. So I'll give them a wide berth, find a good place to put in, and again I'll carry on my journey. The other thing I'm doing is I'm constantly looking at the conditions. So I might be trying to assess what's happening with the wind. So I might be looking over at a tree. I might be looking at the clouds just to give me an indication of maybe, is the wind strength changing, is the direction changing, and again I'll be making an assessment of the current. So maybe every half an hour I might just turn around and just make sure I can paddle against the current. Managing the risk, lakes, estuaries and the sea. Okay, first off, paddling on open water like large lakes, estuaries or the sea can potentially carry a high level of risk. Offshore winds and strong tidal currents can easily sweep us out a long way from the shore, so we need to be vigilant and plan ahead in order to keep the risk acceptable. If we're in any doubt, then head inland to a suitable venue. Again, if we look at the hazard table, we've got man-made hazards and natural hazards. We've also got our lovely stretch of beach or the shore of a large lake, and we've got a couple of paddlers. Okay, if we look at the wind first, we've previously mentioned that the wind has a big influence on us as a paddler. So beginners may start to struggle at 8 miles an hour, and intermediate paddlers may feel uncomfortable at 12. If we look at offshore winds first, offshore winds can quickly blow us away from the shore and need to be treated with a large amount of respect. If there is an offshore wind, then we need to stay close to the shore and have a limit in mind where we will not launch, i.e. greater than 12 miles an hour, stay on the shore. Cross-shore winds are less of a hazard than offshore winds, but make sure they do not blow you against rocks or against a pier or breakwater. Onshore winds carry the least risk and are definitely worth waiting for. Again, the comments about tailwinds apply here also, so plan the outward leg into the wind and then the return leg using the tailwind. We also need to mention sea breezes. Sea breezes are more localized than prevailing winds which may have been forecasted, and are caused by the land and the sea warming up and cooling down at different rates. This may give rise to an onshore breeze in the morning, which then changes to offshore in the afternoon. The tidal flow can be very powerful, especially when the tide is constrained through narrow channels against islands or complex coastal geography. We should seek help if we are unsure of the tidal flow, and we will discuss this further in Module 7. We can also use the tide to our advantage if we're paddling on a tidal river or estuary, and again, we'll talk some more about this during Module 7. Okay, we can review the hazards. So there may be other craft on the water, there could be chain ferries as well, there could be moor boats, mooring ropes and buoys, again bridges, piers, jetties, breakwaters, marker buoys for fishing pots, etc. And there may have been a spillage and there may be some pollution that we have to look out for. Again, the bank could be slippy, could be mud or wet grass, it could be tidal currents or rips. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about these in Module 7. We could have some rapids, rocks, sandbanks, maybe a reef. We've also got the surf and the swell. And again, if the swell is breaking onto a breakwater, then that actually may cause quite a lot of chop around breakwaters. And again, the tide may be racing over a reef and causing an overflow. Again, there could be some jellyfish or weaver fish, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about those in Module 3. When I'm paddling, again, pretty much like inland water, I'm constantly observing what's going on. So I'm looking ahead for hazards. I'm looking how far I am from the shore. Am I drifting out and I need to paddle a little bit closer? Once I've identified my hazards, again, it's the same principle. I put a buffer in place that's going to keep me safe. So if I accidentally fall in, I'm not going to get my leash entangled up with a mooring buoy. And again, I'm constantly asking myself the question, how far from the shore am I, and can I safely paddle back to the shore? The other thing that I'm doing is I'm constantly assessing the conditions. So I'm assessing the wind direction and the wind strength. So I might be looking at a flag on the shore, or how quickly the clouds are moving, or I might be looking at the effect of the wind causing some ripples on the surface. I might be assessing the effect of the tide on myself. So if I pass a fishing buoy, I might just stop paddling and just see which direction that I float. Managing the risk, rules of thumb. Earlier we discussed that good judgment only comes with experience. So I've included a section on rules of thumb, which will be a good initial guide for venue selection. So starting with canals and non-tidal rivers. So wind speed 8 to 12 miles an hour. River level, cover a little bit more about this in Module 6, but we need to aim for normal river levels and avoid the river after heavy rain. River grade, ungraded to grade 1. Look for quiet stretches of canal or rivers with limited traffic. Large lakes, estuaries and the sea. Wind speed 8 to 12 miles an hour. But again, we need to be very careful about the offshore wind speed. So here we've dialed in 10 miles an hour maximum. Surf 1 to 2 feet maximum. Tides, aim for slack water. So that's 2 hours either side of high or low tide. And yeah, look for sheltered bays or harbours with limited traffic. Okay, this slide is about good practices for launching and recovery. Take care when lifting boards from boot or from car roof racks. Always ask for help. How far is the launch and recovery site from the car? Would a shoulder strap or a kayak trolley help? If launching from a jetty, take care about collisions with larger craft. Try and use locations with minimum drops to the water surface. Try and use purpose-built launch spots with ramps or sandy beaches. Ensure your leash is fitted before launching. We don't want to lose that board. Ensure there is sufficient water depth to avoid catching the fin on the shore. Use kneeling or prone stance when in shallow water or close to the jetty. Will the tide affect the safety of the launch spot when I return to recover? So if I return in 3 hours and the tide has gone out, has that revealed hundreds of meters of rocks that I've got to walk over? Then the final point is really important. we really need to undertake a pre-launch survey, and that's best done with everybody in the group, so we can survey the weather and any hazards on the water. So we can ask questions like, is the weather as expected? Is there an offshore wind? How big is the surf? Is there a rip? What about moored boats and rocks? Here are a few really useful videos going through launching and recovery. The first video goes through equipment setup prior to launch, prone paddling, which is a great technique for launching and rescue, and also when you've lost your paddle. The second video covers launching and recovery from a dock or a pontoon, and the final video covers launching from a beach. Please pause this video and open the video links which are contained in the YouTube video description before returning here. Hope you enjoy the videos and see you back soon. Welcome back. I hope you enjoy the videos. Okay, here's a few questions to test our understanding about reviewing the basics and managing the risk. Question 1. What piece of safety equipment should we always use while paddling? Number 2. What should we always do when launching, landing or paddling in shallow water? Question 3. Which side of the river do we paddle on? Question 4. Name 3 factors you can use to determine how far from the shore is safe. Question 5. When on a large lake or the sea, what can you use to check if the wind direction or strength is changing or is about to change? And the final question, number 6. You are paddling down a river and you spot a lock 50 meters ahead. What do you do to pass safely? Okay, and the answers are on page 13. Good luck. Here are a few useful links and references for the slides, and I've included them in the YouTube video description section. They cover the Academy of Surf instructors and also the British Canoeing definition of what sheltered water is, and there's also a reminder that Module 7, the rise and fall of the tide, covers spotting rip currents. Okay, let's go through the answers to the questions. So number 1, what piece of safety equipment should we always use while paddling? Well, that's a leash. Number 2, what should we always do when launching, landing or paddling in shallow water? Well, that's kneeling down or prone paddling. Number 3, which side of the river do we paddle on? On the right. Question number 4, name 3 factors you can use to determine how far from the shore is safe. Well, we can look at the wind speed and direction, the effect of the current or tide, the height of the swell, and also the paddler's skill and experience. Question 5, when on a large lake or the sea, what can you use to check if the wind direction or strength is changing or is about to change? Okay, well, we could look at a flag or a tree on the shore, or maybe a lobster pot flag. We could look at the size and the direction of the ripples or the waves. We could see if there's any large cumulus clouds approaching, and we could look at the direction in which any moored boats are facing. And again, it could actually be getting harder to paddle as well. The last question, number 6, you are paddling down a river and you spot a lock 50 meters ahead. What do you do to pass safely? Well, we check behind for other boats, look for a safe spot to land, kneel down and land, then portage round and find a safe place to launch. Hope you did okay with the answers. Great stuff. You've completed SUP Safe Module 1. Well done. Module 2 is ready when you are and covers equipment, clothing and cold water shock. Please leave some feedback and happy paddling. Bye for now and hope to see you soon.